Claire Morris. The car had left the road and ended up in a ditch. At first, everything was quiet. Then smoke began to rise. Inside the vehicle, a woman remained motionless. Her husband stood outside, merely observing. He did not call for help. Later, he claimed it was simply a terrible accident, that the car had mechanical problems, and that he had tried to save her. But something felt wrong. Why didn't he attempt to pull her out? Why did he tell people the car was empty? And why was there a petrol can in the back? Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his upbringing appeared stable, perhaps even enviable. His father, Alexander Webster, held a senior position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as Detective Chief Superintendent in the Fraud Squad. His mother, Odette, had formerly worked as a nurse but gave up her career to raise the children, their eldest son Ian and twins Malcolm and Caroline. Behind closed doors, however, the family home was ruled by strict discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander controlled the household absolutely. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to leave the house. Meals were eaten in silence unless the father chose to speak. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection nearly non-existent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by the patriarch. From an early age, Malcolm exhibited troubling behavior. While his twin sister Caroline easily formed friendships, Malcolm struggled to connect. Rather than withdrawing quietly, he developed unusual methods of gaining attention. He began pretending to faint, frequently collapsing at convenient times to avoid chores or responsibilities. His supposed health problems prompted speculative diagnoses ranging from asthma to epilepsy, yet no definitive medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medication based on his symptoms without seeking a clear cause. As sympathy diminished, Malcolm intensified his attention-seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, igniting small blazes at school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never led to formal charges, they unsettled other parents. Children were warned to avoid him, and isolation became his normal experience. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm seemed to thrive. He joined the drama club, improved his academic performance, and reinvented his persona. He claimed that his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his fabrications eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him diminished. At 15, Malcolm was withdrawn from school. He did not resist. Education no longer held his interest. He craved independence and income. His early working years were fragmented and unsatisfying. He drifted between jobs, collecting garbage, picking fruit, working in retail, none offering purpose or fulfillment. At 17, under his mother's guidance, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he excelled and even entered a serious romantic relationship. That ended abruptly following a terminated pregnancy and emotional fallout, yet Malcolm moved forward. By the late 1970s, he worked as a trainee nurse at a care facility in Bexhill. It was there that his criminal tendencies became apparent. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to divert their savings toward personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scheme ran its course, he changed tactics. He began targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies persuasive. Presenting himself as a struggling young man with stories of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with careful calculation. Despite these crimes, Malcolm earned his nursing qualifications and continued his medical career. In the late 1980s, he obtained a position in Abu Dhabi. It appeared to be a fresh start, an international post, career advancement, a new life. But the reality was grim. Within months, 3 children with special needs died while under his care. Each succumbed to sudden cardiac arrest. There had been no prior signs of illness or medical warnings. Although no autopsies were performed, murmurs began to circulate among the staff. In a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no formal investigation occurred. Malcolm departed the country without facing consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed life as if nothing had happened. He secured nursing employment, and began cultivating a social persona once more. At a social event, he met a woman named Claire Morris. Claire Morris was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm Webster. She grew up in a secure, affluent home and had a younger brother named Peter. Claire was the type of person who illuminated any room she entered, outgoing, confident, and full of vitality. Her lively personality made her instantly well-liked by those she met, and her charm did not go unnoticed the night she encountered Malcolm at a social gathering. Malcolm was entranced. Claire embodied everything he admired: warmth, energy, and a strong sense of self. The two engaged in conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship appeared to develop naturally, but beneath that, quiet doubts lingered. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, harbored reservations from the outset. There was something about Malcolm that unsettled her. Though she could not articulate it precisely, her instincts urged caution. Peter, in contrast, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, perceiving him as clever and polite, perhaps a little roguish, but nothing concerning. From Malcolm's perspective, Claire made a radiant impression. His twin sister, Caroline, described Claire as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke favorably of her. For a moment, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might guide his life in a better direction. They married on September 3, 1993, in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire appeared radiant, and Malcolm performed his role flawlessly, the devoted husband charming and attentive. Friends and family departed the celebration, believing the couple had a promising future ahead. Young in love and financially secure, everything seemed idyllic. But that perception changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. The couple had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Claire beside him. According to his version, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, causing the car to leave the road and end up in a ditch. Moments later, the vehicle erupted into flames. Malcolm survived. Claire did not. He was taken to the hospital and remained under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally distraught, and wore a neck brace, yet scans and medical examinations revealed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no signs of smoke inhalation. His physical state was inconsistent with the violent crash he had described. At Claire's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he comforted would later spend Claire's life insurance payout on a £30,000 yacht, a new Range Rover, and other extravagant purchases. The insurance totaled £200,000, a substantial sum in 1994, and it disappeared quickly. Questions began to arise. Why had Claire been unable to escape the car, as Malcolm had? Investigators confirmed that although the car had left the road, the crash had not been severe. The vehicle had not been traveling at high speed, and the damage did not indicate a violent impact. The origin of the fire remained unknown. Even more troubling, when Malcolm called for help, he told dispatchers the car was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he made no mention of Claire. Despite these concerning details, no formal charges were brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued, untouched by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Claire's death, Malcolm began a clandestine affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he portrayed himself as a grieving widower attempting to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm discussed Claire's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, frequently returning to the question of whether a second autopsy would be conducted. His cold fascination deeply disturbed her. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist, fearing that more lay behind Claire's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine ended it. Malcolm, unbothered, moved again. By 1995, he was residing in Saudi Arabia, where he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly refused. After his time in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm moved yet again. This time, he crossed hemispheres entirely, establishing himself in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer employed as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that same month, he met Felicity Drum, an intelligent, outgoing cancer nurse. She was articulate, bright, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the ideal target. He performed his role flawlessly, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded. He spoke frequently about life's fragility and the importance of not wasting time. She found him open-hearted and soulful. Within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed, and they married that April in Auckland. For their honeymoon, the couple retreated to the picturesque Bay of Islands. But beneath the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker reality began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea prepared by Malcolm and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep lasting nearly 36 hours. It was not an isolated incident. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, confusion, and prolonged sleep, all suspiciously occurring after consuming food or drink prepared by her husband. When she voiced her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could determine the cause. Tests revealed abnormal liver function, typically associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who maintained a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, ever present and in control. Their home life soon developed a sinister pattern. Fires began to occur in proximity to them. One at Felicity's parents' house while they were visiting, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering buying. These incidents left Felicity uneasy, but she initially dismissed them, until Malcolm persuaded her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son, Ned. From an outsider's perspective, the family appeared happy and complete. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, the couple planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm exited the vehicle and told her to remain inside. But she didn't listen. She stepped out to phone the bank, likely to delay their meeting. Later, the significance of that decision would become chillingly clear. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued. Nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy. But one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia. But this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father, Brian, had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Brian began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeen. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Brian took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. Not a word of this had ever been shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife Claire's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood. The forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Just once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were serious: arson, drugging his wife, and administering harmful substances. But Webster had already fled the country before he could face justice. From that moment, he became officially a wanted man. As the investigation progressed, further details came to light. Felicity had only known about one life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 additional policies with a combined value approaching $2 million New Zealand dollars. His motives were consistent: control, deception, and financial gain, regardless of the cost. What he did next was entirely in character. In 2000, Malcolm returned to the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He obtained work, maintained the appearance of respectability, and once again targeted wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital where he worked in nurse administration and she managed the surgical theater. They soon began a relationship. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm seemed sensitive and compassionate. He told her fabricated stories about battling leukemia, disappearing for hours while claiming treatment, and recounted the tragic death of his first wife, Claire. He even spoke of certain television scenes, fires, car crashes, as being too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no knowledge that he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, that he was a fugitive from New Zealand, or that he had previously attempted to murder 2 women. Meanwhile, police continued to track him. They located him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly. When the authorities finally warned her of the danger, Simone initially refused to believe it. She confronted Malcolm, who turned pale. Without another word, he packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and left. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, named Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Claire Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Bannister under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Claire's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that she had been heavily sedated prior to her death, just as Felicity had been. This confirmed what many had long suspected. Claire had not been unable to escape the burning car due to circumstance. She had been incapacitated by drugs administered by Malcolm. Shockingly, it was also revealed that Felicity had been drugged even while pregnant with their son. The trial became historic in Scottish law, marking the longest trial involving a single defendant in the country's history. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as fortunate to be alive. Courtroom testimonies painted a chilling portrait of a man who weaponized trust, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving elaborate lies for personal gain. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and completely lacking empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to take responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, seeking to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his application was officially rejected. The High Court found no grounds for appeal. Today, Malcolm Webster is serving his life sentence at Shotts Prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. As for Claire Morris, the woman whose life was taken and whose justice was delayed for over a decade, her memory endures. Her brother Peter, speaking after the verdict, said, "Today is a good day. Claire is greatly missed. She was good company. We were proud of Claire becoming a nurse. Let this story be told in her name, to honor her life, validate her suffering, and ensure that Claire is never forgotten." Moving on to the next case. Julie Minogue. Milford is a picturesque coastal city situated in Connecticut, United States. Positioned along the Long Island Sound, it provides scenic views and a lively community. Spanning just over 25 square miles, it has a population exceeding 50,000 residents. Renowned for its stunning beaches, Milford draws both visitors and locals who value its landscapes and waterfront activities. The city carries a deep history reaching back to colonial times, showcasing a combination of historic architecture and modern conveniences. Yet, the people of Milford could never have anticipated that a tragedy would strike there in 2022. But first, it is necessary to reveal the layers of her past. Julie Minogue was born on July 19, 1982, in the lovely town of Goshen, New York. She was blessed with caring parents, Gerald J. Minogue and Sandra Barish-Doper, who raised her alongside her two siblings, sister Allison Barati Corcoran and brother Peter Gerald Minogue. During her upbringing, Julie excelled academically, attending the respected Monroe-Woodbury schools and eventually graduating from Monroe-Woodbury High School. She went on to continue her studies at Orange County Community College, broadening her education and embracing fresh opportunities along the journey. After completing her studies, Julie Minogue became a dedicated medical assistant at Connecticut Coastal Obstetrics Gynecology and found fulfillment in many areas of her life. She maintained an active lifestyle, regularly partaking in running and walking to keep herself invigorated. Nevertheless, her deepest devotion was in being a mother to her two sons, Nicholas Keith Turner and Sean Michael Turner. The information concerning her marriage and husband remains unknown at this stage. Julie's devotion and affection as a single mother were extraordinary, shaping the close connection she shared with them. In 2017, Julie Minogue discovered love again and began a relationship with a man from Roxbury named Ewan Anthony DeWitt. Together, they welcomed a son in 2019, whom they named Luke Anthony Minogue. However, as time went on, difficulties emerged in Julie's relationship with Ewan, leading her to separate from him in 2021. She moved with her sons into a condo on Salem Walk in Milford, keeping their well-being as her highest priority. By 2022, her eldest son Nicholas was 21 and had honorably served his country in the Coast Guard. 17-year-old Sean was thriving as a high school senior, full of energy and promise. Her youngest, 3-year-old Luke, was a bright and joyful presence in their home. Julie herself was 40, and life appeared steady for her and her 3 boys. But tragedy was looming just around the corner. On the late night of December 6, 2022, 17-year-old Nicholas Minogue was jolted awake by terrifying screams. At first, he ignored the noise, thinking it might be coming from outside the neighborhood. But as the cries grew louder and more desperate, he realized something was terribly wrong. Fearing for his mother's safety, Nicholas rushed downstairs. In the darkness, he caught a glimpse of a horrifying scene. A man wielding an axe and his mother lying on the floor, soaked in blood. Amid the chaos, Nicholas heard chilling words echoing. "You didn't believe me." In shock and panic, the teenager bolted back upstairs, locked his bedroom door, and immediately called 911 to report what he had witnessed. To fortify himself further, he pushed a heavy chair against the door. His heart pounding, he cracked open his window, desperately signaling for help. Within minutes, police arrived and entered the house. Terrified, Nicholas leapt from the window, only realizing afterward that the shouts he heard were from Milford PD, not the attacker. Officers quickly found him outside and ensured his safety. Inside the house, police discovered a horrifying scene. In the kitchen, Julie Minogue lay lifeless in a pool of blood, her face and skull mutilated by multiple deep wounds. Nearby, on the stove, rested a large axe smeared with evidence of the crime. In the living room, 3-year-old Luke sat silently on the couch, frozen in shock and unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding around him. Not a tear nor a sound escaped him, as though he remained paralyzed in shock. An officer stayed beside him, offering comfort and support until additional officers arrived at the scene. After her tragic death, Julie's body was respectfully transported to the Connecticut office of the Chief Medical Examiner for a detailed examination. Following a thorough autopsy, the examiner concluded that the cause of death was multiple chopping wounds and blunt impact injuries inflicted on the head, torso, and limbs. The precise findings offered critical evidence about the brutality of the attack, shedding light on the harrowing circumstances of her untimely end. Meanwhile, as police seized the axe discovered on the gas stove, they carefully scoured every corner of the home, determined to find any evidence that could bring them closer to the perpetrator. Inside the residence, they launched an exhaustive search, meticulously inspecting each room for possible clues about the horrific crime. The disturbance quickly drew the attention of concerned neighbors who gathered nearby. The atmosphere grew heavy with tension, as the community stood ready to support the investigation in any way they could. In the midst of the swelling crowd, a cooperative neighbor stepped forward with an unexpected piece of evidence. Ring camera footage captured outside his home at Long Meadow Complex. Police seized the chance, hopeful the recording would yield a valuable lead. Reviewing the footage, they spotted a chilling sight: a figure walking with an axe in hand, closely matching the description Nicholas had provided. The discovery sent a surge of anticipation through the investigators, who now believed they had identified a significant lead. Focus turned immediately toward uncovering the identity of this man with the axe. That same day, December 6, 2022, a critical development occurred when a distressed woman phoned police to report a horrifying call from her son. In a trembling voice, she relayed the shocking confession. Her son had just told her that he killed his girlfriend. The urgency in her words prompted an immediate and forceful law enforcement response. Determined to uncover the truth, officers quickly located the woman and engaged her in questioning. It was then disclosed that the man behind this grim confession was none other than 42-year-old Ewan DeWitt, Julie's former partner. Armed with this crucial revelation, police attempted to call Ewan, hoping to initiate a critical exchange. Their efforts, however, were cut short when Ewan abruptly ended the call. So it became essential for the police to investigate Ewan's past, as they believed it could provide critical information needed to advance the case. Born in Roxbury in 1979, Ewan Anthony DeWitt displayed a wide variety of interests and endeavors. As a gifted athlete, he pursued his love for ice hockey, reaching the level of semi-professional play. Ewan's eagerness for learning drove him to earn a bachelor's degree in history from Siena College, demonstrating his intellectual drive. He was not someone content with just one occupation, so he also pursued a career as a firefighter. In addition, he shared his knowledge by working as a personal trainer. In 2006, Ewan was arrested in Connecticut for driving under the influence along with traffic violations. He entered a guilty plea, which led to a suspended sentence and probation. Following this, Ewan DeWitt's path took a notable turn when he joined the distinguished ranks of the U.S. Marine Corps in 2009, beginning a career as a weapons specialist and non-commissioned officer. He served the country for 5 years, achieving the rank of Lance Corporal in 2011. A striking photo from his Marine years shows Lance Corporal Ewan DeWitt actively operating as a machine gunner. In the image, he is seen courageously manning a powerful M2.50 caliber machine gun mounted on a vehicle during the critical defense of the Amphibious Task Force naval exercise. This took place on December 3, 2011, aboard the USS Chima. With his leadership abilities and skill, he rose to the position of machine gun section leader within the prestigious 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. Ewan committed himself fully to service, completing multiple tours in Afghanistan, the Middle East, and other classified locations alongside his dedicated comrades. His and his brother's remarkable journey was featured in a 2015 article in the Registered Citizen, which highlighted their efforts to preserve a piece of history. Yet Ewan's life shifted to a darker course when legal troubles emerged. In November 2019, Milford police arrested him for assaulting a victim, leading the court to issue a protective order. According to court records, the case remains unresolved and is still pending. With his next court appearance set for April 14, 2023, Ewan continued to assert his innocence by entering a not guilty plea. He was released on a $20,000 bond while awaiting the judicial process. Ewan's troubled past involved a disturbing episode in which he was arrested for his actions against Julie shortly after the birth of her son. Reports indicated that he had thrown a heavy object at Julie Minogue and also smashed her phone to stop her from seeking help. Out of fear for her safety, Julie sought shelter at a neighbor's home and contacted authorities. The incident underscored the alarming nature of Ewan's behavior and its damaging effect on those around him, adding yet another troubling layer to the events as they unfolded. In 2021, he faced accusations of assaulting emergency personnel as well as a woman in Wake County, North Carolina. Court records showed that he pled guilty and was sentenced to a total of 95 days in jail. Although the exact length of his incarceration was unclear, these run-ins with the law reflected a consistent pattern of troubling conduct, raising more doubts about Ewan's character and past actions. Beneath Ewan DeWitt's troubled background, a deeper pattern of violence surfaced, specifically directed toward Julie Minogue. Multiple protective orders had been issued against Ewan for earlier incidents of domestic violence. These orders, dated November 2019 and January 2021, were intended to protect not only Julie, but also the children who were present during those altercations. One such incident involved Ewan being intoxicated and getting into a heated quarrel with Julie. According to a statement made by the victim's son, Ewan hurled a playpen at Julie's head, causing a distressing injury. While Ewan was undergoing rehabilitation, Julie moved to secure a restraining order in an attempt to shield herself from his harmful behavior. Despite these measures, Ewan was still granted visitation rights, leaving ongoing fears about the safety of those involved. In addition to their volatile relationship, Julie and Ewan DeWitt became embroiled in family court matters starting in 2021. It began when Julie submitted a petition in August 2021 for child support for their son Luke. By October 2021, a judge ruled in her favor and ordered Ewan to provide financial assistance. As tensions continued to escalate, Ewan took Julie to court in December 2021 seeking resolution regarding visitation rights. The court intervened and granted supervised visitation for Ewan in April 2022, with a scheduled hearing in April 2023 to further address the matter. These legal battles shed light on the complexities and challenges faced by Julie and Ewan as they navigated their post-relationship dynamics. As the investigation progressed, new details were revealed that on November 14, 2022, just 3 weeks before her death, Julie took a decisive step by visiting the Milford Police Department to file a complaint against Ewan. She alleged that he bombarded her with over 200 text messages within a span of just 2 days, despite the existence of a protective order that explicitly forbade him from contacting her. Officer Scott Nadlin listened to Julie's concerns and diligently collected evidence of the text messages from her phone, further solidifying the case against Ewan. In a heartfelt plea for protection, Julie Minogue expressed her deep concern for her safety and the well-being of her children in a sworn affidavit submitted on November 17, 2022. Determined to put an end to the ongoing abuse, she stated, "Don't believe I should endure this mistreatment any longer." Fearful of the consequences, she detailed the relentless harassment she faced. Julie Minogue also wrote in the document that, "And I'm scared he's going to kill me." Officer Nadlin, resolute in this pursuit of justice, meticulously crafted an arrest warrant, alleging Ewan's violation of the protective order. The document, filled with crucial details, was reviewed by supervisor, ensuring its accuracy and validity. They made sure that the arrest warrant application contained the requisite probable cause to support the charge that the text messages sent by Ewan DeWitt violated the modified protective order that was issued on January 15, 2021. On November 21, 2022, the court reopened the warrant application and made its way to the Milford State's Attorney's Office. However, the story took an unexpected turn as the Assistant State's Attorney, committed to thoroughness, sent the warrant application back to Officer Nadlin and requested further information before proceeding. In this delicate dance between law and justice, Every step forward demanded meticulous attention to detail. However, on December 1, 2022, Julie Minogue successfully obtained a civil restraining order from a judge. In the hearing, which lasted about an hour, Julie presented evidence of the text messages, Ewan's struggles with substance abuse, mental health issues, and a history of violence. She expressed concern for Ewan's well-being, describing his bipolar rage and erratic behavior, and emphasized the importance of him receiving proper treatment and therapy. Julie firmly believed that Ewan should not be allowed around anyone until he'd received the necessary help and support. Recognizing the imminent danger she faced, a no-contact restraining order was swiftly issued on December 1, 2022, providing a legal shield against any further interaction with Ewan. This order took a grim turn when, 5 days later, Ewan murdered Julie with an axe inside her condo. At this point, all the evidence confirmed that Ewan was the primary subject of the investigation, and the search for him grew more intense as police meticulously canvassed the area around the Salem Walk condominium, determined to leave no stone unturned. Their pursuit led them to a dive bar on Ocean Avenue in West Haven, where they sought the cooperation of the local community. Officers approached patrons, informing them of the ongoing case and urging them to contact the authorities if they spotted Ewan. It was during this focused effort that two attentive individuals noticed someone who matched the suspect's description. Wishing to help the investigation, they immediately alerted the police, providing critical details about the suspect's location. Speaking with one of the witnesses, who asked to remain unnamed, officers learned that the individual had seen someone resembling the suspect loitering in the parking lot for a short while. Soon after, the suspect entered a food truck situated in the lot. Responding without delay, the police surrounded the scene. Without resistance, they arrested Ewan DeWitt on December 6, 2022, taking him into custody and moving one step closer to uncovering the truth. Investigators began a thorough interrogation of Ewan regarding the early hours of December 6, 2022. At first, Ewan remained stone-faced and refused to disclose critical details. However, after hours of persistent questioning, a breakthrough emerged. Ewan ultimately confessed to the brutal killing of Julie with an axe. He explained that he had entered the residence quietly through the kitchen window and concealed himself while waiting for his victim to appear. When Julie finally came into the kitchen, he launched his attack, swinging the axe with lethal force. It was at this terrifying moment that Nicholas, Julie's son, descended the stairs and came upon the scene. Panicked, Ewan fled, leaving the axe behind on the stove. His confession sent a wave of shock through the investigation, revealing a chilling version of the night's events. During his first court appearance in State Superior Court in Milford on December 7, 2022, Assistant State's Attorney Alana Paul presented the judge with new developments. She disclosed that Ewan had fully confessed to the murder, though even without his admission, she maintained that the case against him was strong. Prosecutor Paul emphasized the supporting surveillance footage and the crucial testimony of Julie's son, who had witnessed part of the crime. Given the severity of the matter, Paul argued that a substantial bond was required. Stressing the seriousness of the case, Judge Arden Grosjean set Ewan's bond at $5 million. The judge highlighted concerns about Ewan's history of ignoring court orders and stressed the need to protect public safety. Under these circumstances, Ewan was placed on suicide watch, and a hearing was scheduled for December 14, 2022, to further address the case. At last, the day of the final ruling arrived. On December 14, 2022, along with the murder charge, Ewan DeWitt faced several additional charges filed by the Milford police. These included criminal violation of a protective order, criminal violation of a restraining order, risk of injury to a minor, and reckless endangerment. By pressing these charges, authorities sought to reflect the wider range of Ewan's alleged behavior and its consequences. A hearing was scheduled for April 6, 2023, to address Ewan's pending criminal cases. He had not yet entered a plea. Prosecutors stated that Ewan had already admitted to killing Julie Minogue. However, no further details about the hearing were disclosed by the police. In a statement, the family voiced their determination to take action and ensure accountability for those who failed in their responsibilities. They also expressed hope that the case would serve as a driving force for stronger protections for individuals facing domestic abuse and violence. With steadfast resolve, the family seeks to bring meaningful change and prevent such devastating tragedies in the future. This case reflected both the thorough work of law enforcement and the heinous act of a man who murdered his ex-girlfriend in a fit of rage. Moving on to the next case. Natalie Holloway. The last day Natalie Holloway spent in Aruba was May 29, 2005. She intended to have the greatest day of her life. However, that day quickly turned into her worst nightmare when she vanished from the crowded Caribbean island, well known for its many tourist destinations. Often described as a Caribbean paradise, it is regarded as one of the finest islands with beautiful beaches. Natalie was born in Clinton, Mississippi, on October 21, 1986, and later relocated to Mountain Brook, Alabama. She had a younger brother named Matthew and was the eldest of the two children. Natalie's family shared a strong bond and cared deeply for her. Her mother, Beth Holloway, and father, David Holloway, first met and fell in love during high school before marrying in the 1980s. Over time, however, their differences became apparent. After 13 years of marriage, they made the decision to separate in 1993. Beth then took on the responsibility of raising her two children alone and did an excellent job. In 2000, she married Alabama businessman George "Jug" Twitty, moving with her children to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Even after the divorce, David remained dedicated to his family. He ensured that neither of his children ever felt abandoned. Natalie was raised in a loving and supportive household where she excelled academically. She attended Mountain Brook High School in Birmingham, Alabama, and was recognized as an honor student actively engaged in extracurricular activities. The bright Holloway child wished to take one last vacation with her friends before beginning college. Initially, both of her parents were firmly opposed to the idea, but after seeing her determination, they eventually agreed. Natalie was accepted to the University of Alabama on a full scholarship to pursue a pre-med degree. She was very excited about this trip because it was her last one before starting college. 25 of her Mountain Brook High School friends and 7 adults accompanied her when they arrived on the Caribbean island of Aruba on May 26, 2005. All of them stayed at the Holiday Inn, and once they arrived, the students were left unsupervised. Over the next few days, Natalie and her friends enjoyed relaxing, snorkeling, and partying late at night at clubs and bars. She was savoring her first taste of freedom, and the fact that she was legally old enough to drink made it even more enjoyable. The group mostly frequented popular spots, such as Carlos and Charlie's and the Casino Excelsior, both associated with the Holiday Inn where they were staying. It was the final day of Natalie and her friends' trip to Aruba, May 29, 2005. They were at the casino near a blackjack table when a Dutchman approached and introduced himself to Natalie. He was a student from the Netherlands named Joran van der Sloot, and he appeared to be about her age. He was staying nearby, and soon they began to like each other and talk. Natalie and her friends were heading to Carlos and Charlie's, so they left and invited Joran to join them. Just before the club closed, Joran entered and led Natalie to the back bar to offer her some drinks. He gave her a couple of shots after she left with him. It was odd that the bartender seemed to know him beforehand, but she didn't pay it much attention. Natalie did not realize that her drink had been spiked with an unknown substance commonly referred to as Liquid X. The substance is colorless and odorless and requires only a few drops to be effective. Assailants often use it to incapacitate women before taking advantage of them. Liquid X was known for making people feel so sick that they became disoriented and unable to remember what happened. Natalie soon began to feel the effects of the drug, and she was intoxicated before realizing it. Joran told Natalie a story about sharks near the lighthouse to persuade her to go with him to the beach. A friend of Joran had left their car outside the club for him. He guided Natalie to the back seat of Deepak's silver gray Honda, where Satish, Deepak's brother, was seated in the front. Her friends saw her run off with the Dutchman while ignoring them. This was the last time anyone would ever see her. Natalie was not at Mountain Brook High School on May 30, 2005, when the students were preparing to board their plane back home. The first call was made to Beth Holloway, informing her that her daughter was missing and had missed her flight. Frightened, the mother boarded a friend's private jet and reached Aruba in 12 hours. She went directly to the police station, where Natalie had been reported missing, and urged them to begin an investigation. Beth insisted that she and the casino manager review the surveillance footage from the previous night. They saw her daughter leaving the club with Joran. When she questioned the manager about Joran, he told her that he was a regular. Joran van der Sloot was well known in nearly all of Aruba's casinos. He often spiraled out of control, gambling, using drugs, and engaging in other troubling behavior. Although he lived on his family's farm, Joran had his own guest house. When his history was examined further, it was revealed that Joran was rumored to target women on their final night in Aruba. Before returning to his guest house, he would separate them from their friends, drug them, and then assault them without any sense of morality. There were multiple allegations of aggravated assault against Joran, accusing him of exploiting people who were intoxicated, but none of the cases ever advanced. He maintained a carefully devised plan that no one could uncover. Around 3 a.m. the next day, Beth finally convinced the police to take her to the van der Sloot residence. When she met Joran's father, Paul van der Sloot, he immediately denied that his son had any involvement in the case. Shortly after, Joran and his friends Deepak and Satish joined the conversation. Beth told them that Natalie had last been seen with Joran at the bar. Joran claimed they were only having a few drinks and that he and his friends had later dropped her off at the hotel. Paul quickly interrupted, instructing his son to stop speaking to the other boy. Paul worked as a judge in Aruba's government, which shielded Joran and gave him just enough time to dispose of the evidence. With the police offering little assistance, Beth was forced to return to the station. All of Joran's statements were proven false by the hotel's CCTV footage, which showed no record of Natalie being dropped off at the inn. David Holloway had already arrived in Aruba the following morning to search for his daughter. Natalie had been missing for 48 hours, yet the police did not seem to suspect Joran's involvement. They kept telling Beth that her daughter would reappear at any moment. At that point, they even began to suggest Natalie might be on drugs or had simply run away. David Holloway organized a ground search as more relatives and friends traveled to Aruba to assist. He was both terrified and desperate. Once a local Alabama news station reported that Natalie was missing, journalists and news crews flooded the island. Stories about Natalie appeared on the front page of nearly every newspaper, television channel, and magazine. Beth Holloway sat for hours of interviews with the New York Times and most other major news outlets. Mothers across the United States felt her anguish and wanted answers. David began receiving calls from parents saying their daughters had also traveled to Aruba and that similar incidents had occurred to them. They said they were told to abandon those cases because there were no leads. As public pressure intensified, the investigators began questioning Joran and the Kalpoe brothers. The Aruban police first questioned Joran van der Sloot, brothers Deepak and Satish, and Natalie Holloway's parents about taking her to the California lighthouse near Ayrshire Beach on the northwest tip of the island to see sharks. The young men said they did this. They claimed they dropped her off at the hotel at around 2 a.m. on May 30th, 2005. Before Joran and the Kalpoe brothers drove off on June 5th, they stated they saw a guard approaching Natalie outside her hotel. That was when 2 former hotel security guards were arrested. The young guards were arrested on June 9th and held on suspicion of first or second-degree murder and kidnapping with intent to kill. Karen Jansen, the Attorney General of the Netherlands Antilles, explained that they were not arrested immediately because authorities had hoped one of them would eventually lead investigators to concrete evidence. On June 14th, searches were carried out at the beach, and the following day at Joran's home, where police seized 2 cars, computers, and cameras. Although many people in Aruba criticized the government for responding too slowly, some journalists argued that the delay had helped strengthen circumstantial evidence. However, the guards were released on June 18th. One of them later told police that while they were both in custody, one of the Kalpoe brothers had confided something to him. He said that he and his brother had left Natalie with Joran at a beach near the hotel instead of actually taking her back there. Paul van der Sloot, Joran's dad, was also questioned by police and arrested on June 22nd. Steve Gregory Crows, a DJ who worked on party boats and may have had something to do with the case, was also arrested. According to several news sources, Crows and Paul were both put out on June 26th. Satish CPO said he lied to the cops during his first trial. Again, he changed his story. This time he said that he and Deepak dropped Joran and Natalie off at the hotel, and that was the last time they saw them. At the same time, a worker at the Aruba Racket Club swore to police that he saw all 3 men in a car near the club at 2:30 a.m., even though the CPOs said they were already home. Every time someone said something, the case got farther away and there were still no signs of Natalie. There were thousands of people from the area, the Aruban Police Department, the Dutch Marines, FBI officers, and more who searched the whole area, but only on land. In the end, on June 25th, a volunteer group sent divers and sonar equipment to see if they could find any proof. 6 weeks after Natalie went missing, her family decided to offer a $200,000 prize for her safe return. They also offered a $100,000 reward for any information that led to the case. The prize for Natalie's safe return home had grown to $1 million by the end of July. Beth stayed in Aruba for 2 months and only left a few weeks before August 26th, when the CPOs were put back in jail after being freed earlier. By September 3rd, the brothers and Joran were all free. Late in August, the Aruba Search Team and Rescue Foundation sent divers to look again after hearing that a radar machine had found human bones about a mile off the coast, but they didn't find any. Aruba police said that people saw Natalie drinking a lot and having drugs on her that night, but no one saw her taking any of them. It was March 2006, 10 months after she had been seen last. Gerald Dompig, deputy head of police, said, "We are very sure that she either went into shock or something happened to her body with all the alcohol. And maybe even drugs that she took or that they gave her and she just passed out." People who thought she was dead looked for her body at the beach where Joran said he last saw her and at a salt pond near her hotel. Joran's story changed all the way through. He found the attention he was getting from the media interesting and used it to his advantage. To get money for his gaming habit, Joran would often call news stations and say he had new information about the case. His birthday is August 6, 1987, and he was born in Arnhem, Netherlands. He was born to Paulus van der Sloot and Anita van der Sloothuang. People knew that he did very well in school and was an athlete at the International School of Aruba. During the time that Natalie Holloway went missing, his lawyer father was in the process of becoming a judge. Lorraine Watson, a close friend of Natalie's, talked about the first time she met Joran. "I remember he's really tall. I remember looking at him thinking, 'Oh, who's that guy? He's hanging out with my friends,' she said. It wasn't really a red flag for me because he was going to go out with us later." Right away, the Holiday and staff recognized Joran as a regular who liked to hang out with young women tourists. He went to jail for 3 months and was let out without being charged because there wasn't enough proof to keep him there any longer. He and the CPO brothers were caught again near the end of 2007, but this time nothing happened and they were all freed. After that, Joran traveled around the world on his own and lived in Thailand for a few months. Although he did some questionable things, he was smart enough to avoid getting caught. He allegedly talked about the case all the time and seemed happy that it had made him famous, but he got angry easily. He was said to have thrown a glass of wine in the face of Dutch crime reporter Peter de Vries when the reporter asked him why people should accept anything he said during a sit-in interview in January 2008. CNN reported in November 2008 that the Aruban police had 2 new leads to follow up on. That night on May 29, 2005, a witness came forward to say that he saw Paul van der Sloot. He told the cops that at 7 a.m. he was asleep at home. That night, and at 4 a.m., his son was on the island near Palm Beach. On May 30, 2005, someone saw a young man running from the pond towards a fast food place. The man was wet below the waist and only had 1 shoe on. Not long after that, an older guy drove by in a red Jeep with the young man. The second tip came from Joran's ex-girlfriend, who told police that Joran had told her one night, "Who knows, you may now be on the beach with someone who can get rid of a corpse." The family hired a private investigator named Tim Miller, who spent almost a year looking for Natalie in Aruba, sometimes with Dave Holloway. This happened on Natalie's birthday, October 21, 2005. They were digging in a garbage dump in Aruba when the deputy police chief told them he thought they should check the water as well. Someone broke into a fisherman's hut not long ago and stole a fish trap and tools that could have been used to weigh down a body. Louis Schaefer, an entrepreneur who had been keeping up with the case, offered to pay for a search of the ocean bottom within a certain range. In November 2007, a boat called Persistence left for Aruba. They found what looked like a fishing trap about 90 feet below the surface on December 24th. On December 29th, they sent a car that could be controlled from afar down to look into it. They saw something that looked like a head. A diver from the boat joined 2 Aruban police dives on December 30th, but they didn't find anything connected to Natalie. There would be new leads and witnesses all the time, but they would all lead to the same place, nothing. Someone calling themselves Marcos sent Dave a message in early 2008 saying that he knew drug runners were paid to hide Natalie's body at sea. Instead, the drug runners took the body to Nicaragua and hid it on land. Miller went to Nicaragua and met Marcos there. Marcos offered to use a GPS tag to go to the hiding place and look for the body parts. According to the police, Marcos called Miller and said he had found her. He said her body was all jumbled up and she was wrapped in a blanket. He also told Miller that they needed to put her in 2 ice boxes and told Miller to call Mr. Holloway right away to let him know they had found Natalie. Miller didn't call, though, because he didn't want to give Dave any more false hope. Following that, Marcos vanished without being seen or heard from again. In February 2010, Paul Vandersloot died of a heart attack that happened very quickly. He didn't help his son at all. Lawyer for the Holloway family. John Kelly says that Joran emailed him in March under the fake name J.P. Sanders and said he knew where Natalie Holloway could be found. He wrote, "I want to tell the truth. Now that my dad is dead, I have nothing to hide. There's a catch. I want to help Natalie's family. Okay, I'll tell you what happened to Natalie and where she is now for $4 million. That way you can help Beth bring her home." John Kelly met with Joran in Aruba after Beth gave her permission. He promised to start with $25,000 up front. John asked Joran what would happen if they didn't pay him after he said he knew where the body was. Joran is said to have told Beth that she could wait another 5 years without feeling bad about it. The family asked the FBI to help them. So they could catch Joran committing wire fraud, they planned to make him think he was getting paid. At the very least, this would give them a reason to hold him. John and Joran got together again, and this time John sent him $25,000 by wire. As soon as Joran got paid, he took him to a house near the Aruba Racket Club and told him that he had hidden Natalie's body in a base that had just been poured before the house was built. He said that he and Natalie had been on the beach that night. He told Natalie he wanted to go, but she wouldn't. When things got hot, he threw her off in anger. He said that she lost a lot of blood when she hit the back of her head and quickly died. John wasn't sure if he could believe his whole story, but it turned out that Joran hid the body with his father's help at the beach and then buried her in the grounds. The house that Joran showed him hadn't been built on since 2010. The police said that his story wasn't true enough to issue an arrest order. John and Joran kept in touch until May 25th. When he said he had turned himself in, he instead flew to Peru with the money he was forced to give them. The charges against him were wire fraud and blackmail by a federal grand jury on June 30th, 2010. As soon as Joran got to Peru, he went back to his old ways. He talked to Stephanie Flores, a college student of 21 years old in the Atlantic City Casino in Lima, Peru. They played poker together for about an hour or two. As seen on the security video that was taken from the scene, Stephanie then cashed in some chips and walked to Hotel TAC with Joran. There he picked up his key at the front desk. They were last seen going up the stairs around 5:33 a.m. and then going into room 309. At 8:36 a.m. on May 30th, 2010, Joran was seen being locked out of his room and asked to be let back in. After 20 minutes, he left by himself with only a rucksack. He left the TV on in the room and told the front desk worker, "Don't bother my girl," as he left. Employees would find Stephanie's badly beaten body in room 309 2 days later. Ricardo Flores, Stephanie's father, was a famous businessman and former race car driver, so the case was sure to get a lot of attention in the local news. Joran ran south and was caught in Chile in the end. He did everything he could to change how he looked. He shaved and dyed his hair white and got rid of most of his clothes. Most of the things Joran could live without seemed to have been thrown away, except for his notebook. The cops in Lima said that Joran first denied killing Stephanie, but after 4 days in jail, he finally broke down and admitted it. He said that they went to his room to gamble online and that she left for a short time. When Joran got home, the first thing he saw was Stephanie looking through his laptop and finding information that had something to do with Natalie going missing. She got scared right away and tried to leave the room, which made Joran even more angry, and he killed her in a fit of rage. Stephanie probably passed out from a broken neck minutes before she died. An autopsy later showed that she was awake when Joran threw her body to the ground and then went back to take a quick shower. When he saw that Stephanie was still living, he choked her to death with his shirt and then ran away. Joran did one last rude thing. He put Stephanie's dead body in a sexually suggestive position and then left the room. Everyone in the U.S. was shocked. The same thing was happening again, but this time there was another victim. After 5 years, Beth Holloway was heartbroken on the same day that Yaron was finally put on trial. He was charged with murder in the first degree, theft, bank fraud, and extortion in Peru, as well as by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Birmingham, Alabama. The defense lawyer said the crime was manslaughter, but Yaron eventually admitted to killing the person. They said that he was going through a lot of mental pain because of the Natalee Holloway case. In 2012, the court finally gave Yaron a 28-year prison term. They had been through a lot of pain and trauma over the years, and this was their first win. In September 2010, Beth Holloway went to Peru to see Joran in Castro, the jail where he was being held. A Dutch film crew showed how Joran was getting by in one of the toughest prison rooms in the world. Beth said that the moment made her feel free. "This is what I'd worked so hard for 5 years," she said. Joran was in prison. "I had this in mind back in 2005. The victims' families felt like a turning point came when Joran was put in jail. They could finally move on with their lives." While Lady Figueroa was still pregnant, Joran was planning to marry her in July 2014. Lady Figueroa told CBS that she first met Joran in 2010 when she went with her cousin to visit another inmate. At the time, Joran was being held at Piedras Gordas, a maximum security prison in northern Lima, where he spent the first few years of his sentence after being transferred from Miguel Castro Castro. During this period, he was allowed visits from his fiancée. Lady claimed that the man who would later become her husband had changed. But after allegedly threatening to kill the warden at Piedras Gordas, Joran was moved in August to Calapalca Prison, a remote facility in the Andes Mountains notorious for harsher conditions. Lady, who gave birth to a child in September, told a Dutch outlet that Joran had been stabbed there by another inmate. Later, the head of Peru's National Penitentiary Institute dismissed her claims, calling her a habitual liar. Lady showed Fox News Latino a 2015 letter written by Joran from prison, in which he claimed that Stephanie Flores's father had placed a $10,000 bounty on his head. In the letter, he pleaded with authorities, writing, "I don't want to die," and begged them to ensure his safety behind bars. By then, both the police and the media widely recognized him as a manipulative liar and a psychopath. His serious crime, coupled with his lack of remorse, guilt, or fear, strongly suggested that his words were nothing more than another fabrication. In June 2023, Joran van der Sloot was extradited to Birmingham to face federal charges of bribery and extortion. At first, he pleaded not guilty, but later that same month, he changed his story and confessed to killing Natalee as part of a plea deal. Under the agreement, he received a 20-year sentence for extortion and wire fraud to run alongside his existing prison term in Peru. For the first time, Joran openly admitted what happened on the night of May 29, 2005, the night Natalee never came home. According to his confession, after Natalee became sick, the Calpo brothers left her alone with him at the beach. Joran claimed that Natalee initially kissed him briefly, but when he tried to push things further, she resisted and kneed him in the groin to protect herself. Enraged, he struck her in the head with a cinder block. Joran then dragged her body into the water and disposed of her in the ocean. Aruban law only allows 12 years from the date of a crime to file a murder charge, so the statute of limitations there had already expired by the time of his confession. Officials in Aruba said they wanted access to Joran's case files before making any decisions about next steps, but technically the case of Natalee Holloway remains open on the island. Natalee's disappearance became one of the most infamous true crime stories in U.S. history. The tragedy of an 18-year-old honors student, a loving daughter on the cusp of college, vanishing in a foreign country shocked the nation. The case highlighted failures not only by Aruban investigators, but also by those who enabled Joran's behavior. For years, it raised questions in the media, among law enforcement, and across communities. Most haunting of all were the cries of a mother who could not save her child. Even with Joran's 2023 confession, Natalee's remains have never been recovered, and her case stands as a chilling reminder of how justice can remain out of reach. Moving on to the next case. Regina and Vicky. During the late 1980s, Hawaii hosted the NFL Pro Bowl, endured the impact of Hurricane Eva, and reached a population of 1 million residents. Yet perhaps most strikingly, during this period, Hawaii had its second serial killer, who proved to be even more notorious and lethal than the first. Although nearly 4 decades have passed since his initial attack, the case of the Honolulu Strangler remains unsolved. On May 29, 1985, Vicky Purdy went out to go clubbing with friends in the Waikiki district of Honolulu. At just 25 years old, Vicky worked at an adult video rental store and was married to an Army helicopter pilot named Gary. The couple had been together since Vicky was 20 and had relocated to Hawaii less than 18 months prior to her death. Vicky was last seen alive around midnight when a taxi dropped her off at the Shorebird Hotel so that she could retrieve her vehicle from the hotel's parking lot. When she did not return home, her husband, Gary, tried to reach her through a telephone paging system, but his attempts went unanswered. While driving around in search of her, Gary found his wife's car still in the Shorebird Hotel's parking lot, but there was no sign of Vicky. The following morning, however, Gary's worst fears were realized. Vicky's body was discovered on an embankment overlooking Keahi Lagoon near Lagoon Drive. While she was still wearing the yellow jumpsuit she had left home in on the evening of the 29th, her underwear was missing. Her hands had been tied behind her back, and she had been sexually assaulted. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation using a ligature. Notably, Gary told the Honolulu Star-Bulletin that his wife was a very strong person and not somebody to be messed with, recounting that early in their marriage, when conflicts arose, she had knocked the shit out of me. He also described the 25-year-old as streetwise, noting that she knew whom not to trust. The nature of Vicky's assault was therefore all the more shocking and led to speculation that more than one person may have been involved in the attack, with Gary himself suggesting that it would take at least two people given her physical strength and determination. Another significant detail is that two women had been stabbed to death at Vicky's workplace just 1 year prior to her own death, and it was initially theorized that the crimes might be connected. For more than 6 months following Vicky's death, the Honolulu Strangler, as he would soon be known, lay dormant. He did not strike again until January 14th. Regina Sakamoto, a Kansas-born teenager, was last heard from at 7:15 a.m. on the morning of January 14th. Described as shy but friendly, the 17-year-old was very close to her mother and actively involved in school activities. Her brother Omar described her as lively, fun-loving, and a friend to everyone. She planned to attend Hawaii Pacific University after the summer. Having missed her bus on the morning of January 14th, Regina called her boyfriend to inform him she would be late. Witnesses saw her shortly afterward waiting for the next bus, but the teenager never made it to school. The following morning, Regina's body was found at Keahi Lagoon. She was nude from the waist down, and her hands had been bound behind her back with a parachute cord. Like Vicky, she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Unlike Vicky, however, Regina had been left partially undressed, and one of her feet was tied to a rock with an electrical cord. The similarities between the two cases were so pronounced that police quickly concluded Regina and Vicky had fallen victim to the same predator. Authorities realized they were confronting a serial killer. The Strangler's third victim was a young, married churchgoer named Denise Hughes, described by her supervisor as a woman who always wore a smile. The 21-year-old failed to show up for her secretarial shift on January 30th, 1986, just 2 weeks after Regina's death. Denise, the wife of a Navy serviceman stationed aboard a ship at Pearl Harbor, meant that her husband was unaware of her disappearance at the time. Notably, Denise also traveled to work by bus, just as Regina had. On February 1st, 2 days after she was reported missing, her body was discovered by fishermen. She was wrapped in a section of blue tarpaulin in the Mauna Lua stream, which flows into Keahi Lagoon. She was still wearing her blue dress. Like the other victims of the Strangler, Denise had been strangled and her hands were bound with a parachute cord. She remained unidentified for several days until her dental records were sent to the mainland United States, where a match was confirmed. Reports are mixed regarding whether Denise was sexually assaulted. Some sources state that an autopsy could not conclusively determine this, but authorities believed it likely given the strong similarities to the cases of Regina and Vicky. On February 5, 1986, just a few days after Denise's body was recovered, the Honolulu Police Department established a 27-person task force aimed at identifying and apprehending the serial killer, now known as the Honolulu Strangler. The detectives selected for the team included experienced veterans from both the sex crimes and homicide divisions. The HBD also enlisted assistance from the FBI and the Green River Task Force, which had previously been assigned to apprehend Gary Ridgway, the notorious serial killer who had become a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983. Ridgway was known for strangling his victims, typically targeting runaways, sex workers, and other vulnerable women and girls. Prominent members of the Green River team included Robert Keppel, who had assisted in the Ted Bundy case, and FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas, the criminal profiler behind the Mindhunter book, later adapted into a Netflix series. The criminal profile developed for the Honolulu Strangler described him as an opportunist who attacked women in vulnerable situations, such as quiet parking lots, isolated bus stops, or out during nighttime hours. Additionally, the Strangler was not believed to be a stalker. He was likely a resident of Waipahu or Sand Island, or possibly worked in the area, and was thought to drive a cargo van. He was also believed to be white or of mixed race, between 30 and 40 years old, and to have no prior criminal record. Further details were provided to the media by Police Chief Douglas Gibb, who stated that the suspect may be experiencing girlfriend or marital problems, and that the selection of victims was likely a matter of opportunity or chance encounters. Following the formation of the task force, additional measures were implemented, including equipping public buses with two-way radios so drivers could request assistance or report suspicious activity. Despite these precautions, the Strangler continued to attack and evade capture. On March 26, Luis Medeiros became the Strangler's next victim. The 25-year-old was described by the Honolulu Star-Bulletin as a young woman who had lived much of her life before truly learning how to live it. She had reportedly left her family as a teenager to move to Oahu in pursuit of independence. She returned home only once in 6 years. During her time on Oahu, she relied on welfare, had minor encounters with the law, and lived with beach people at Makaha. Luis had never married and had 4 children. She was 3 months pregnant with her 5th child when she disappeared. Just days before her vanishing, she had returned briefly to her family home following her mother's death. Her family described her as ambitious and determined to change her life. She no longer wished to rebel and was motivated to improve herself. According to her family, she had finally found happiness. Luis disappeared after leaving the airport, having returned to Oahu from her family home. She had planned to catch a bus back to her apartment, but never arrived. On April 2nd, a week after her disappearance, her body was discovered by road workers near Wakali Stream, 12 miles from where Denise's body had been found 2 months earlier. Luis's hands had been tied with a parachute cord, and she was nude from the waist down. Due to decomposition, it could not be conclusively determined whether she had been sexually assaulted. Investigators noted that the first 3 victims of the Strangler had been dumped near Honolulu International Airport, while Luis had passed through the area. This suggested that the airport held significance for the perpetrator. In response, police deployed undercover female officers around the airport and Keahi Lagoon, but the Strangler did not take the bait. The final known victim of the Strangler was 36-year-old Linda Pesky, last seen on April 29th leaving her apartment. When she failed to return home, her roommate grew concerned, but the worry escalated to alarm when Linda did not show up for work the following morning. Discovering that the 36-year-old's Toyota was unlocked and parked by the Nimitz H1 viaduct, the roommate immediately notified the police. Linda was described similarly to Vicky, streetwise, opinionated, and a fighter. Loved ones also described her as carefree. She had spent the 1970s hitchhiking across the United States before eventually settling in Hawaii, where she worked as a dancer in a nightclub. Much like Louise, Linda abandoned her rebellious ways after giving birth to her daughter. Early in their investigation, detectives quickly discovered that on the night of her disappearance, witnesses had seen Linda's Toyota with its hazard lights flashing. They reported that another vehicle had pulled up beside it, seemingly to offer assistance. The car was described as a cream-colored, American-made van with letters on its back windows, though it was unclear what the letters spelled. Witnesses also saw a man of medium build, in his late 30s or 40s, who was either white or of mixed race. Despite having these details, authorities were initially unable to locate the individual or the van. Then, on May 3rd, 43-year-old Howard Andrew Gay contacted police. He claimed a psychic had informed him of the location of Linda's body, stating it was at Sand Island, a small island at the entrance to Honolulu Harbor. Gay led law enforcement to the locations he had been told, but no remains were found. Nevertheless, investigators combed the area and eventually discovered Linda's body. She was lying off a dirt road, nude, with her hands bound by a parachute cord. A cement block rested on her back, and she was partially concealed by dirt and debris. Following the discovery, detectives turned their attention to Gay, whose story aroused strong suspicion, particularly as he fit the physical description of the strangler. During questioning, investigators learned that Gay was obsessed with an employee of a local sailing club who matched the general description of most of the strangler's victims. He reportedly often stared at the young woman and offered her rides, which she consistently declined. He became enraged when she refused, though she accepted a ride from a biker. Detectives also learned that he had physically assaulted another woman who had refused to enter his vehicle. 6 days after meeting Gay, on May 9th, police arrested him. Howard Gay was originally from Buffalo, New York, and had served in the military. He had been stationed at George Air Force Base in California until 1965, when he was honorably discharged. After leaving the Army, Gay worked a variety of jobs, including delivery driver and telephone lineman, eventually becoming a mechanic for an air freight carrier on Lagoon Drive. He drove a cream-colored van and had previously been married, divorcing his wife in 1983. The couple had 2 children together. He had no prior legal troubles. Given his employment at the airport, he likely had access to parachute cord. He also matched the build and age described by witnesses on the night of Linda's disappearance, as well as the age range outlined in the criminal profile. Women who had been romantically involved with Gay, including his ex-wife, described him as persuasive, charming, and a smooth talker. Investigators also noted that Gay had an interest in bondage and enjoyed tying women's hands behind their backs during sexual activity. His girlfriend at the time was interviewed by police and corroborated these claims. She further stated that on the nights the strangler's victims disappeared, she and Gay had argued, and he had stormed out of their home in a fit of rage. With this information, detectives felt confident that they had identified their suspect. Gay was interrogated for 10 hours and subjected to at least 1 polygraph test, yet no direct evidence linked him to the crimes. The investigators only had circumstantial evidence. Consequently, law enforcement released Gay. Following his release, he told the press, "The police have released me. That's all I know. They have plenty of good cause. They're doing their job." His polygraph tests were inconclusive. Interestingly, police recovered a notepad in Linda's office containing Gay's name and phone number, suggesting he was a potential customer. Additional evidence against him included an eyewitness who, on the night of Linda's disappearance, identified the 43-year-old in a lineup, though she later refused to testify, fearing for her safety after encountering Gay. Gay was monitored for years afterward, and the police offered a $25,000 reward for information, but he was never linked to the Honolulu Strangler by forensic evidence and was never formally charged. After his release, the Strangler ceased attacking. In June 1986, Gay traveled to California to attend his son's graduation, but the young man tragically died in a car accident around that time. Gay subsequently became a born-again Christian and eventually moved permanently to California. He died on November 2, 2003, at the age of 60. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Honolulu investigators maintain that Gay is their suspect. Many aspects of his life and physical appearance align with those of the Strangler. Frustratingly, however, the cases of Vicky, Regina, Denise, Louise, and Linda remain unsolved. Their families were left without closure or justice. If Gay was indeed the Strangler, he was able to live out the remainder of his life in peace, a luxury he did not grant to his victims. Moving on to the next case. Robert, John, and Anton. On October 18, 1955, the dead bodies of 3 young boys were discovered without clothing in a drainage ditch. These boys were Robert Peterson, aged 14, John Schussler, aged 13, and Anton Schussler, aged 11. This devastating incident left a deep and lasting scar on the community. The determined search for justice was met with disappointment as the case stayed unsolved for nearly 40 years. The question persisted: who could have carried out such a monstrous act against these innocent boys? How did they manage to escape justice for such a long span of time? Let us take ourselves back to the 1950s and examine the hidden treasure of Chicago's Northwest Side. Norwood Park and Jefferson Park, situated in this area, offered comfort to those who sought shelter from the turmoil of city life. The tightly knit neighborhood centered around its parish, little league, and bowling alleys. With the city's lowest crime rate, it was an ideal place to bring up a family until disaster occurred in 1955. On February 11, 1942, in Cook County, Chicago, Malcolm and Dorothy Peterson gladly welcomed their first son Robert, fondly called Bobby. Robert was the oldest of 4 children, with younger sisters Barbara and, aged 7, and Susan, aged 5, along with a 3-year-old brother named Tommy. Even during childhood, Robert was noted for his neatness and orderliness, keeping his room spotless at all times. He was a dependable young boy who not only helped at home, but also took an active role in different community activities. John Schussler, born on November 30, 1941, to Anton John Schussler Sr. and Eleanor Lillian Holtz Schussler, carried a strong love for sports from an early age. He was an outstanding and well-mannered child who avoided getting into trouble. 2 years afterward, on November 12, 1943, his brother Anton John Schussler, lovingly called Tony, was born. Tony held a lifelong goal of becoming a veterinarian, a dream he cherished from his earliest years. The connection between the 2 brothers was inseparable, as they took part in shared pastimes and sustained a tight group of companions. As the evening descended upon the quiet streets where John, Anton, and Robert had spent their youth playing sports and discovering their surroundings, a foreboding sense of something sinister and grim filled the air. A terrible incident was approaching. It was October 16, 1955, a brisk autumn day in Chicago. 2 brothers, 13-year-old John and 11-year-old Anton, got on their bicycles and rode to their friend Robert's house. Having already helped their ailing father hang a clothesline in the basement, they now had the whole day free for themselves. With an eager wish to embark on a bold outing, John and Anton each carried $1.25 in cash, excited for their secret plan to head downtown and see a movie. This daring and forbidden adventure was made possible by their 14-year-old companion, Robert, who had both the needed knowledge and the approval to take part. Robert's mother, Dorothy, even assisted them in choosing a film, Disney's The African Lion, which they meant to see at the Loop Theater. Holding $1.50 in his hand, Robert said goodbye to his parents, following their usual routine of warm kisses, and left home with the pledge to be back by 8 p.m. As the evening deepened and the clock passed 8, unease began to overwhelm both households. The boys were nowhere to be found, nor were there any phone calls. Eleanor, the mother of John and Anton, phoned the Peterson home to ask about the boys' location. To Eleanor's shock, Dorothy, Robert's mother, disclosed that they had gone downtown, leaving her stunned. The fear grew stronger when no word came from the boys, prompting Dorothy Peterson to contact the police at the Gale Street station around 10 p.m. She spoke with a sergeant who instructed the families to call the police again if the boys still had not returned within an hour. The sky, which had started off a brilliant blue when the boys set out on their adventure, gradually shifted as the day wore on. That stormy night unleashed heavy rain, heightening the tension that had seized the community. Despite the difficult weather, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Schussler were resolved not to abandon the search for their missing children. They carefully searched every hamburger shop along Milwaukee Avenue and even thoroughly checked the Loop Theater where the boys had planned to see the movie. Yet all their attempts came to nothing. It appeared as if the boys had disappeared without a trace, leaving no choice but to involve the police. Although their children attended the same school and were friends, the Peterson and Schussler families had never met or spoken with each other. It was as though their lives moved side by side, never overlapping. Unbeknownst to them, their lives were about to become closely connected in a manner they never could have foreseen. As police began their search for the missing boys, they questioned what the boys had been wearing and carrying, in hopes of finding possible clues. They learned that Robert had been dressed in a noticeable white Sox jacket, while the Schussler brothers had been wearing Cubs jackets. But where could the boys have gone? The downtown district was several hours away by car, making it improbable that they had traveled such a distance. Perhaps they had used their money on snacks and were walking back in the heavy rain, or maybe they had gone bowling, one of their favorite activities. The search continued as different theories and suggestions were raised, yet the only clear fact was the growing concern of the families involved. When the sun rose on October 17, 1955, the day after the boys' disappearance, the uneasiness within the neighborhood deepened. The police were equally confused, as they had never handled a case in that community where a missing child remained unfound. Even though Robert had skipped school on a few prior occasions, everyone knew he was dependable and would not have left Anton and John on their own. The detectives resolved to visit Farnsworth School on Linder Avenue, where the 3 boys were enrolled, in order to check if the disappearance might be tied to the school. Principal D.W. Thornton suggested searching the north branch of the Chicago River in the Forest Preserve due to its past record of violent episodes. A year earlier, a high school boy had attacked a grade school child near the river. The teachers, Mrs. Bernice Jonas and Miss Cecilia Schwachten, were profoundly disturbed and attempted to keep their composure. Mrs. Jonas suggested that one or two people might have been trying to get the students' attention in recent days, as a few students had reported. The community was seized with fear, and the detectives realized that if the boys were not found soon, gossip and speculation would overshadow the truth. The detectives confronted a difficult challenge. With a population of 60,000 in the district, there were countless doorbells to ring and a wide area to examine. They knew it was essential to reduce the search sites in order to raise the likelihood of success. As a result, they started by looking into the Loop Theater and contacting bus drivers who had been working on the day of the boys' disappearance. One driver, Bruno Malcarini, offered an important clue. He remembered observing 3 boys fitting the descriptions of Robert, John, and Anton boarding his bus at Berto Avenue while showing their student ID cards. He let them off at Lawrence Avenue, where they planned to go to the Jefferson Park Recreation Alley for bowling. The problem arose when they failed to ask for a transfer slip that would have shown they were meant to get off at Central near the Peterson residence. Perhaps this seemingly harmless change of plans set in motion a dreadful chain of events. It seemed the detectives were finally making headway in the effort to find the missing boys. Sightings at the bowling alley provided the next important clue. Neighbors and relatives confirmed seeing Robert and Anton at Monte Cristo Bowling Alley, where they took a restroom break while John chatted with a neighbor. The boys left at 8 p.m. after Robert and Anton returned from the restroom. Edward C. Davis, the alley's manager, added more details that shed light on the boys' movements that day. Davis stated that they had come to the alley twice, once around 3:15 p.m. and again at 7 p.m. However, they were unable to bowl since they lacked the money. This presented a puzzling question. Why would the boys return to the very place where they had earlier been turned away without money to take part in the activity? Although the detectives now had a timeline to follow, there were still holes in their understanding of the events. It was deeply frustrating for them to be so near to the boys, yet unable to find them. The atmosphere inside the office of Captain Russell Corcoran, chief of the 33rd Precinct of the Chicago Police Department, was heavy and solemn on that tragic day of October 18, 1955. The disappearance of the Peterson and Schussler boys had overtaken the entire department, and Captain Corcoran had just reassured the commissioner that every possible effort was being made to locate them. But at 1:15 p.m., the phone rang once more. As the captain listened, his face grew pale and tears filled his eyes. After hanging up, he delivered a grim statement that would haunt the detectives for the rest of their lives. The bodies of 3 young boys had been found unclothed. On that same day, Victor Livingston, a middle-aged liquor salesman, was leisurely driving his car, enjoying the benefits of his hard work. Having earned a fair amount of money, he looked for a quiet location to eat his lunch. He therefore chose Robinson Woods Forest Preserve, a scenic spot known for birdwatching and autumn colors on the northwest edge of Chicago. He had no idea he was about to come upon something terrifying. While sitting in his car preparing to eat, he noticed a lifeless body lying on the ground. Shocked, he quickly drove off to find a phone to notify the authorities. Multiple officers arrived at the site as the report spread. When Victor approached the police to ask about the body, he was told that 3 bodies had been discovered. Because they had been placed in a shallow ditch, only one was initially visible. Despite the detectives' exhaustive search for the missing boys, the dreadful truth they encountered surpassed anyone's darkest fears. Just 2 weeks before Halloween, the boys were found unclothed and piled one atop the other, with Robert's head showing a horrific injury that had already healed. The polluted ground provided no chance of locating footprints or any other useful evidence. The heartbreaking news deeply affected everyone. Even though detectives were expected to uphold a professional front, tears streamed openly that day as they mourned the loss of the innocent boys. With little evidence available, the detectives observed the lack of footprints around the bodies, indicating that the boys had likely been discarded from a vehicle. The killer had carefully concealed their actions, eliminating any trace of the children or incriminating clues. In addition, the grease discovered on their hands, backs, and feet suggested that the boys had probably been killed elsewhere before being left in the woods. The lack of blood, due to the rainfall, further reinforced this theory. Autopsies on the 3 victims determined that they had been dead for about 36 to 40 hours prior to being found in Robinson Woods Forest Preserve. Though early suspicions suggested possible assault, the autopsy results contradicted this belief. Dr. Harry R. Hoffman, affiliated with the Cook County Behavior Clinic, gravely remarked that the perpetrator of such a vile crime had likely satisfied their twisted desires through the act of murder itself. Dr. Jerry Kearns, a veteran in the study of human remains, typically ensured that the heaviness of his work did not interfere with his private life. However, the case of the Schussler-Peterson boys would leave an unforgettable impact on him. Anton Jr. had been struck in the neck with a blow resembling a karate chop, yet fingernail impressions found on Anton's and John's necks revealed they had been strangled. The Schussler brothers appeared to have been killed by bare hands, whereas Robert had clearly been strangled with a rope. Additionally, he had been brutally beaten on the head 14 times with a rake or similar gardening tool, and the other boys had been struck on their faces with what seemed to be the flat side of a knife. Coroner Walter E. McCarrow also shared his thoughts on the tragedy, labeling it as the work of a deranged individual or possibly a group of older boys. It was observed that Robert, John, and Anton were likely held captive in unsanitary conditions, bound and silenced with adhesive tape before being discarded in the forest preserve. Dr. Kearns was well aware that this was no ordinary crime. He asserted that it was not carried out by individuals of the same age group, nor was it the work of a lone 18 or 20-year-old. The assailant had approached from the left rear, and despite the gruesome nature of the crime, there was no sign of sexual assault. Robert had put up a fierce fight for his life, evident from the head injuries he sustained. The recovery of the boys' bodies marked just the beginning of the nightmare. Witnesses came forward to report seeing a vehicle pick up the 3 boys. One witness even claimed the car was a Packard, leading to the interrogation of nearly 1,000 Packard owners. Despite an exhaustive investigation that involved interviewing over 43,000 individuals, the perpetrator remained at large. Anton Schussler Sr., who had lost his 2 sons, expressed his thoughts on the tragic events, stating, "When children can't safely go to the movies in the afternoon and return home, there is something fundamentally wrong with the country." However, the tragedy did not end there for the Schussler family. Anton Sr., at only 41 years old, passed away due to a heart attack just a month after the murders. Eleanor Schussler's life became even more isolated as she mourned the loss of both her sons and her husband. Despite eventually marrying Valentine Bud Kujawa and attempting to move forward, the memories of the murders continued to haunt her. She kept a photo of her boys and a bronze baby shoe of each on her dresser as a constant reminder of the children she had lost. For years, she grappled with the unanswered question of what had happened to her sons, with occasional visits from investigators serving as painful reminders of the unsolved case. Gary Kujawa, her stepson, recalled the profound impact the murders had on her, noting that she was always haunted by the tragedy. The Peterson family also struggled to come to terms with their loss. Malcolm, Robert's father, not only mourned the loss of his son, but also his closest companion. Dorothy, Robert's mother, was left so devastated by the tragedy that she required medical attention. In the aftermath of the murders, Chicago became a place of unease. Law enforcement officers scoured the streets tirelessly, searching for any evidence or clues related to the case. Parents were reluctant to let their children out of their sight, fearing they could also become victims of the unknown perpetrators. Leaving children home alone was no longer an option, as doors were securely locked and even disposing of items in the trash seemed risky, as any suspicious activity could lead to intense questioning by investigators. The community was gripped by fear, with terror infiltrating every aspect of daily life. Despite the disorder, the investigation continued with the presence of numerous uniformed police officers and undercover detectives scouring the neighborhood. Captain Louis Caparelli enlisted an additional 200 officers from his unit, all of whom willingly sacrificed their weekend to aid in the manhunt. It was an unprecedented display of unity within the Chicago Police Department, with one officer commenting, "I've never witnessed anything like it." However, it wasn't until December 7, 1955 that the Chicago Daily News took notice of peculiar markings discovered on John's left thigh, positioned between his knee and hip. These oval-shaped markings, measuring 4 inches by 2 inches, featured a pattern of stars and letters imprinted on the fatty tissue beneath the skin. Of particular significance was the word bear. Dr. Kearns had overlooked this detail in his initial findings, yet there were other crucial oversights as well. Funeral home attendants had uncovered alarming bone fractures in the Schussler brothers, which Dr. Kearns had failed to detect. Additionally, adhesive tape had covered the boys' faces, but it had been removed prior to their bodies being left in the ditch. The perpetrators of this crime were well aware of what they were doing, concluded Coroner McCarran. They took care to eliminate the tape used for blindfolding and gagging the victims, as it could have revealed fingerprints. The leads that once appeared promising gradually dwindled, transforming the once bustling investigation into a silent and stagnant cold case. The brutal murders of 3 young boys in Chicago left investigators with more questions than answers. As if the case wasn't perplexing enough, over a year later, on December 28, 1956, 2 teenage girls, 15-year-old Barbara Grimes and 13-year-old Patricia Grimes, vanished after watching their beloved movie, Love Me Tender. Their lifeless bodies were discovered unclothed on the side of the road, mirroring the earlier murders. However, unlike the boys, was no clear cause of death. The coroner's jury ruled that the sisters froze to death, but the chief investigator, Harry Giello, disagreed. He believed that the ice around the bodies showed that they were warm when they were left there, and that the puncture wounds in Patricia's chest were signs of violence before death. He also suspected that Barbara had been assaulted, which the pathologists had denied. The eerie similarities between the 2 cases led to speculation that the same person might have been responsible for both. After decades of frustration and dead ends, it seemed like the case of the murdered boys in Chicago would remain a mystery forever. But then, in 1994, a bombshell dropped, and it wasn't the kind of evidence you see in TV crime dramas. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no trace evidence examined by a forensics expert. Instead, it was a seemingly innocent comment made by a snitch in a completely unrelated investigation that suddenly opened up a direct path to a suspect in this long-dormant investigation. During an investigation into suspected horse killings and the mysterious disappearance of candy heiress and horsewoman Helen Voorhees Brock on February 17, 1977, a breakthrough occurred when Special Agent Jim Grady and his partner Mr. Ratuno began piecing together clues from the horse racing industry. They knew they were entering a world of secrets. As the pieces started to fall into place, the prosecution team found themselves delving into an underworld of murderers, arsonists, swindlers, conmen, and even a group known as the Horse Mafia. As they dug deeper, they started hearing whispers about a man named Kenneth Hansen in relation to the boys' slayings, who had bragged about the incident to the people he was close with. For years the case was built from fragments of information called from this murky world. But somehow they managed to make it all fit together, painting a vivid picture of what had happened all those years ago. In the early 1990s, detectives were closing in on Kenneth Hansen, who had a rather eventful life. Born to Ethan and Lucille Hansen in 1933, Kenneth was known for his intelligence and charisma during his childhood. He later married his high school sweetheart, Beverly Ray Carlson, and together they had 2 sons, Danny and Mark. In the 1960s, Kenneth opened and managed a riding stable called Camelot near Tinley Park. It was during this time that Roger Spry, a young worker at the stable, became a part of the Hansen family, residing in their house from a young age. However, things took a dark turn when Hansen made inappropriate advances towards Spry and banished him to sleep with the dogs in the kennels. Eventually, when Spry was still a child, Hansen initiated a relationship with him that lasted for years until Spry turned 18. Throughout this period, Spry lived on and off with Hansen, while Hansen also picked up male hitchhikers aged between 11 and 16 years old, offering them lodging at the stables in exchange for work. Hansen would often boast to Spry about his relations with these young boys. As the summer of 1994 approached, Hansen began to feel the weight of impending doom as the investigation into his possible involvement in a decades-old case closed in on him. He became so paranoid that he started asking his neighbor if there were any police officers looking around his house. Meanwhile, the investigations surrounding the disappearance of Helen Voorhees Brock continued to unfold, adding more intrigue to the situation. In July 1994, the police made a significant move by charging Richard Bailey, a former stable owner and acquaintance of Hansen's, with soliciting Brock's murder, but that was not the end of it. Authorities also charged 23 other individuals for their alleged participation in schemes to kill valuable horses for insurance payments. On August 11, 1994, Kenneth Hansen was apprehended by the Chicago Police and Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms at his residence in Country Club Hills, where he was found with a packed suitcase. The arrest was in connection to an arson incident in 1972 that destroyed the Forest View Stables, a rival business, and resulted in the deaths of 36 horses. The following day, on August 12th, Hansen was formally charged with 3 counts of murder, the Peterson-Schussler case. At the time of the murders, he was 22 years old, and he was 61 years old at the time of his arrest. The announcement of the murder charges against Hansen raised questions about the evidence authorities had against him. Despite not revealing specific evidence, Cook County State's Attorney, Jack O'Malley, stressed that after 4 decades the case could not rely solely on physical evidence. This lack of transparency deepened the mystery surrounding the case, leaving many curious about how the prosecution planned to build their case against Hansen. Although Robert Hansen was one of the 43,000 individuals initially interviewed, there is no indication that he was aware of being a suspect or deliberately concealed his involvement from investigators. Police reports suggest that on October 16, 1955, Robert, John, and Anton were hitchhiking on Milwaukee Avenue when they were picked up by Hansen, who resided just a few blocks away from where he encountered the boys. Hansen then brought them to Idle Hour Stables, a place he often visited and worked at on the northwest side of the city. According to reports, Hansen attempted to engage in inappropriate acts with the boys, and when they resisted, the encounter escalated into violence, ultimately leading to their deaths. That same night, a witness, Hetty Salerno, heard 2 terrifying screams coming from the direction of the Idlehour stable while she was occupied with her tasks. Spry, who lived with Hansen's family, testified that Hansen once shared a disturbing story involving 3 boys he had picked up while they were hitchhiking. According to Hansen's account, he brought them to a barn where he assaulted Anton. When John, Robert, and Anton threatened to tell their parents and the authorities about what had happened, an argument broke out. Hansen allegedly ended up strangling one of the boys in a fit of rage, then felt forced to kill the other 2 to prevent being exposed. Afterward, Hansen's friends arrived, and together they disposed of the bodies in nearby forest preserves with the assistance of an employee. Hansen openly admitted the murders to several individuals, even mentioning that his brother, Curtis Hansen, had struck one of the boys with a blunt object. Kenneth Hansen lived in constant fear that Curtis might one day reveal his secrets. Witnesses during the first trial testified that Hansen had confessed to them about the murders while inside a room at the Idlehour stable. The stable was owned by Silas Jamie, a contentious figure in the horse breeding industry known for his erratic temperament and alleged ties to violent and illicit activities. Despite this reputation, he managed to rise in the ranks, becoming a leading presence in Chicago's horse scene. It was believed that Silas somehow learned about the 3 boys being killed in the stable and reacted with fury. Some witnesses even alleged that he had a role in helping to dispose of the bodies. Hansen boasted that once the bodies were discovered, he moved to South Chicago and arranged for the Idle Hour stable to be burned down to destroy any remaining evidence. In 1995, Hansen was convicted of the horrific crime, yet his circumstances shifted when the Illinois Appellate Court overturned the verdict 5 years afterward. The ruling stated that the jury should not have been allowed to hear Hansen's prior record of inappropriate conduct with boys. However, justice was ultimately served in a 2002 retrial. The jury swiftly delivered a guilty verdict, resulting in Hansen receiving a sentence of 200 to 300 years in prison, ensuring he would remain incarcerated for the rest of his life. Even though he appealed the ruling in 2004, it was upheld. Kenneth Hansen struggled with dementia while in prison and died on September 13, 2007, at the age of 74. The announcement of his conviction stirred a wide range of emotions, from relief to outrage. One individual especially affected was a stepbrother of the Schussler boys, whose grief reawakened after hearing of Hansen's passing. Leonard Goodman, Hansen's defense lawyer, continued to assert his client's innocence, arguing that had Hansen been arrested earlier, he could have established a reliable alibi. But with so many decades gone by, recalling exact details from 1955 was no longer possible. Prosecutors and investigators insisted that the evidence against Hansen was compelling, describing the case as effectively settled. They further claimed Hansen had preyed upon numerous boys prior to his capture. The Peterson-Schussler murders evolved beyond a single crime, becoming a terrifying narrative that spread fear and uneasiness throughout the city. What was once a serene neighborhood had turned into a place where darkness was dreaded and uncertainty was feared. Moving on to the next case. Winifred Rosemary Mendoza. Winifred Rosemary Mendoza resided on a farm in a rural part of Colombia with Alberto Vilma. She was the youngest of 3 Venezuelan siblings and was recognized for being the charming and smiling young woman. On Monday, March 21, 2022, Winifred Mendoza vanished. This account begins in the rural region of Armenia, Colombia, a location that is warm and lively, not only due to the lush green of its coffee plantations, but also because of the cordiality of its residents. By early 2022, Winifred Mendoza, a 24-year-old Venezuelan, lived there with her partner, Alberto Vilma, who was 27. Yet one day, without warning or any trace, on March 21, 2022, Winifred mysteriously disappeared. Her brother, Felix Mendoza, residing in Cucuta and communicating with her daily, became concerned when their mother conveyed her worry over Winifred's lack of response. At that moment, neither Felix nor her partner Alberto considered alerting the authorities, hoping she would return on her own. Nevertheless, the following day, Fernando, a young Venezuelan living in Bogotá who knew both Winifred and Felix, reached out. He indicated that Winifred had sent him a message early Monday morning, stating she was traveling to Bogotá. Unfortunately, she never reached her destination. That same day, her brother Felix contacted Alberto Vilma. Alberto told him that following an argument, Winifred had packed her belongings and said she was going to Bogotá. 2 days later, Felix journeyed to Armenia in search of his sister. The day after his arrival, he visited the farm where she lived and met with Alberto. They agreed that they should officially report Winifred's disappearance. However, when Alberto attempted to do so, he discovered that Winifred's friend in Bogotá, Fernando, had already filed a missing person report, which was subsequently sent to Armenia. There, police investigators Christian Marilanda and Arturo Velasco assumed responsibility for the case. Yet for the authorities to initiate their investigation, they needed more information about Winifred. They learned that she lived on a farm in rural Armenia with Alberto and had held several jobs. They discovered she had no known enemies and was not wealthy, which excluded the possibility of kidnapping. They also learned that she was the youngest of 3 Venezuelan siblings, all born and raised in Altagracia, Venezuela, and she was particularly recognized for her charismatic and cheerful personality. The investigators also sought information regarding Alberto Vilma. They found that although Alberto and Winifred had known each other since childhood, they had not been friends at that time. Regarding Fernando, the young man living in Bogotá who had reported her disappearance, they learned that he and Winifred knew each other because they both played volleyball in Venezuela. Felix, Winifred's brother, had moved to Colombia in 2019 due to deteriorating conditions in their home country. He settled in the city of Cucuta, according to both Fernando and Alberto Vilma. They had also arrived in Colombia toward the end of 2019. Fernando settled in Bogotá, working in delivery services, while Alberto secured a position on a farm in the beekeeping industry alongside his brother. Toward the end of that year, Alberto contacted Winifred via Facebook, as he frequently did. Winifred shared with him the difficult situation in Venezuela, and Alberto suggested she come to Colombia, believing she would have better opportunities to improve her life there. By early 2022, Winifred made the decision and traveled to Colombia on January 9th. Like many Venezuelans, she crossed the border and made her way to Armenia using funds sent by Alberto. He picked her up from the terminal, since she did not know how to reach the farm. According to Alberto, he and Winifred began a serious relationship shortly after her arrival. She started working on the farm, and Alberto, enamored with her, envisioned a future with the family together. He believed she felt the same way. Their first days were happy. However, less than 2 months after Winifred's arrival, Alberto began noticing a change in her behavior, sensing she was not the same. He frequently asked if something was wrong. If she wished to continue the relationship, she reassured him that she did. Yet, according to Alberto, the dynamics had shifted. He noticed she was often on her phone, and given that she barely knew anyone in the area, he wondered whom she might be communicating with. As days went by, unbeknownst to Alberto, Winifred had been communicating with an old acquaintance. It was Fernando, the young Venezuelan with whom she had played volleyball during their youth. He had also migrated to Colombia and was currently living in Bogota. They had begun chatting for some time. After several days, according to Fernando, their conversations became more frequent. They no longer just communicated on Facebook. They often conducted video calls and shared intimate aspects of their lives. Something deeper had developed between them. They confessed their feelings for each other and agreed that she would travel to Bogota to get to know him better. Meanwhile, Alberto remained confused about whom Winifred was speaking to so often. Then, one day in mid-March, he discovered their conversations when she accidentally left her Facebook account open. Despite seeing the messages, Alberto attempted to convince her not to end their relationship, as he was deeply committed to being with her. On March 21, 2022, according to Alberto, Winifred was talking to Fernando again, seemingly unconcerned by his presence. Upset, he confronted her, and she mockingly responded that she was leaving him. The following day, at 6 a.m., Fernando in Bogota received a message from Winifred, informing him that she was on her way to the city. Additionally, Alberto's brother, who lived on the same farm as Alberto and Winifred, also received a message from her. "Hello, Winder. Good morning. You know, I had an argument with your brother because I don't love him anymore. I want another man. I took the opportunity when he went up there and left. I'm sorry for what I did to your brother. But when you don't love someone, it's best to leave. Thank you for everything, and I apologize for what I did." He replied, "Good morning, Winnie. It's okay. And it's true. If you don't love someone, you shouldn't be with them. We're still good. Take care. Truly, thank you for everything." She then messaged Fernando, "Okay, I'm on my way to Bogota, but I'm scared because I took a cheap taxi and the driver keeps looking at me." For the police, the circumstances remained unclear. However, this message suggested that Winifred might have taken a taxi to Bogota and subsequently disappeared. The police investigation was only beginning. Winifred Mendoza had vanished from her home, yet some individuals claimed to have received messages from her indicating she was traveling from Armenia to Bogota to meet a friend. The desperate search commenced. Authorities suspected that either Alberto or Fernando might hold information regarding her whereabouts. The police contacted Fernando, the person Winifred intended to meet in Bogota. He informed them that the last time he spoke with Winifred, they had planned to meet at the city's northern bus terminal. Despite waiting nearly all day, she never appeared. The investigators then visited the farm where Alberto Vilma resided. He stated that following an argument, she had left. This prompted them to go to the bus terminal in Armenia, where they obtained surveillance footage to determine if she had boarded a vehicle on the morning of March 21st. They found no evidence of her being there that morning. At this point, they decided to contact Fernando again, who provided further details about his conversation with Winifred the night before her disappearance. She had expressed a desire to leave the farm and felt highly anxious, urging him to assist. With many questions remaining, the investigators reviewed the message Winifred sent to Fernando about being in a taxi to Bogota. "Okay, I'm on my way to Bogota, but I'm scared because I took a cheap taxi and the driver keeps looking at me." Using this lead, the police returned to the transportation terminal in Armenia and began questioning the taxi drivers who frequented the area. However, after nearly a week of searching in Armenia, there was no indication she had ever entered a taxi. At this stage, nearly 20 days after Winifred's disappearance, investigators believed the key to her whereabouts might lie with either Fernando or Alberto. Consequently, they requested an analysis of the mobile phone activities of both Winifred and her partner Alberto. The objective was to trace incoming and outgoing calls, voicemail messages, text messages, and location data from their devices. A substantial investigative effort was undertaken to pinpoint the cell towers to which the victim's phone had connected. However, obtaining this information would take over a month. Meanwhile, Felix, Winifred's brother, remained in Armenia. He tirelessly walked through streets and avenues, posting flyers with her photograph and speaking with locals. Tragically, this visibility led to extortion attempts, increasing the family's distress. 2 months later, the long-awaited results from Winifred's phone data were received. The analysis revealed to the police that Winifred's phone had not moved from the farm on the day of her disappearance. Armed with this information, the investigative branch Sijan requested a search warrant for the farm. On June 23, 2022, the warrant was granted. Investigators, accompanied by a forensics team, immediately proceeded to the location. There, they encountered Alberto Vilma, who received them calmly and courteously. After thoroughly searching the house, they reached Winefer's room. The blood-sniffing dog they had brought indicated a find. Forensic specialists then applied a chemical that produces a luminescent reaction upon contact with blood, producing a blue glow in this case. This reaction was observed on the floor, the sink, and the shower curtain. While this suggested that a violent act might have occurred, it did not conclusively prove Alberto's involvement. The blood could have belonged to an animal, and throughout the inspection, Alberto remained cooperative. Additionally, Fernando in Bogotá could not be excluded, as he also had feelings for Winefer and had even offered to travel to Armenia to assist with the investigation. That day, investigators collected multiple blood samples for further analysis, and the search continued. At one point, investigators entered a room where Alberto and his brother were present. There, they searched Alberto's suitcase and discovered a red cell phone wrapped in a piece of clothing. The phone matched the description of Winefer's device. Upon inspection, they confirmed it was indeed hers. This indicated that Winefer's phone had never left the farm. This finding strengthened investigators' suspicion that Alberto Vilma likely knew something about Winefer's whereabouts. However, when questioned about the phone and its ownership, Alberto claimed he had purchased it online. He stated that he had stored it in his suitcase because the reception in the area was poor. After this, investigators did not question Alberto further that day and departed. They immediately sought an arrest warrant, as the evidence indicated that Winefer might not have left the farm. Contrary to Alberto's assertions, 2 days later, on June 25, 2022, the arrest warrant was issued. Investigators returned to the farm and formally arrested Alberto. Once at the police station, Alberto, seemingly trapped, voluntarily expressed his desire to tell the truth. The evidence was mounting against him in the case of Winefer Mendoza's disappearance. That day, Alberto Vilma provided a detailed account of the events leading up to the fateful night. He recounted discovering messages between Winefer and Fernando on Facebook a week prior. Although she apologized and insisted that Fernando was merely a friend, Alberto believed she intended to leave him for Fernando. A week later, on the night of March 20, 2022, Alberto observed her talking to Fernando again. She spoke as if he were not even present, seemingly ignoring his feelings. In a fit of rage, he grabbed her by the neck until she fell to the ground. He then took a cable and strangled her with it. As blood flowed from her, Alberto was uncertain whether it was due to the initial assault or another cause. At that moment, he realized the gravity of his crime. Winefer lay motionless on the floor. It was midnight. Alberto washed the blood from his body. He then approached his brother and told him that Winefer had left after an argument. He took her phone and sent messages to both his brother and Fernando in a desperate attempt to deflect suspicion and conceal his heinous act. Alberto buried the body near the house where they lived, just a few inches deep, making it more likely for the police to discover. Upon hearing the news, Felix, Winefer's brother who was in Cucuta at the time, returned to Armenia. Learning of his sister's body was a devastating blow to him and his family. Winefer had been the light of their home, their cherished young one. Her loss was profoundly painful. The prevailing question in both Colombia and Venezuela was what had driven Alberto Vilma to murder Winefer. The day after his arrest, Alberto was brought to court, where the prosecution charged him with aggravated femicide. He pleaded guilty. Months passed as the preliminary hearings before the trial progressed. In early December 2022, following numerous forensic examinations, Winefer's body was released to her family. Felix Mendoza returned to Cucuta with her ashes. Several days later, on January 13, 2023, Alberto Vilma was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Today, Winefer Mendoza's ashes remain with her brother, Felix, in Cucuta, as he awaits the opportunity to take them to the rest of their family in Venezuela. Winefer's family feels as if a piece of their heart has been torn away. She was the beloved daughter, the joy of their household. The pain of never seeing her smile, her liveliness, and being unable to share moments with her is immense for them all. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.